Okay, hello. We'll give everybody a minute to stream into the room. Got about 83 people so far. Hi, everybody, and welcome to our Reframing the Conversation Around Family Engagement webinar. My name is Lisa Aramoni. I'm Director of Communications for the National Association for Family, School, and Community Engagement. And we want to start with just a couple of housekeeping items before we get into the webinar. As people join, we'd love for you to introduce yourself in the chat box. Let us know who you are, where you're from, what you do. If you have a question about today's webinar, can you please put it in the Q&A box instead of the chat box, because the chat tends to move very quickly and it's not possible for us to monitor the chat and pull questions from there. We'll be leaving a lot of time for discussion at the end of the presentation, so we really invite you to put all of your questions into the Q&A whenever you think of them. This webinar will be recorded, so we'll be sending that out to all registrants within about a week. And at the conclusion of the presentation, we're going to have a poll pop up, a survey, a satisfaction survey, and we would love for you to hang around for 30 seconds more at the end of our webinar and just give us your thoughts on how we might be able to improve in the future or what you liked and didn't like. And with that out of the way, I'd like to introduce Yoli Flores, Chief Learning Officer of the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, and Vito Borello, Executive Director of the National Association for Family, School, and Community Engagement.
Great, thank you, Lisa, and good afternoon. We're thrilled that so many of you could join us. Thank you for being part of this webinar on reframing family engagement. We are absolutely thrilled to launch what we call GLR Learning Tuesdays and our partner webinars with the National Association for Family, School, and Community Engagement, or NAFSCE, with my partner Vito, who I'll introduce in a moment. And if we could go to the next slide. Our partnership with NAFSCE has been instrumental in accelerating our work at the campaign around successful parents and our changing the narrative work. And we couldn't be more delighted and grateful to be joining forces in moving the field forward around family engagement. Our partner webinars are intended to lift up and share important work that our partners are engaged in and that advances the work of the campaign. In this first partner webinar, NAFSCE will share efforts to reframe the conversation around family engagement so that we see real impact in communities across the country, especially around student achievement gaps. And Vito, I know you'll share more as you introduce the session and our moderator in our panel. But first, let me say a few words about the Campaign for Grade Level Reading for those of you that are not part of the campaign. And if we could go to the next slide. So the Campaign for Grade Level Reading launched in 2010 to disrupt generational poverty by mobilizing communities, and they're represented by all of these stars on the map. We mobilize communities to find solutions for one of the major obstacles in the pathway out of poverty, and that is the failure to read proficiently by the end of third grade. And what we do is we inspire and motivate these communities to do three things to ensure early school success as measured by third grade reading. So the first is to put a stake in the ground around a third grade reading goal that is ambitious, achievable, and actionable. Number two is that they develop plans to solve major drivers of the third grade reading proficiency gap. First, too few young children are ready for school. The second driver is that too many students are missing too many days of school. And the third driver is that too many children are experiencing summer learning loss. And then the third thing that are engaged is that they themselves at the level to implement that plan. Most notably, these are data holders, providers of services and supports to families and young children, and most importantly, parents and caregivers. So this map on the screen represents the more than 300 communities that are part of the network and whose work at the local level is advancing our agenda around parent success to advance early school success and ultimately third grade reading. So with that, Vito, I'd love for you to talk about our partnership, starting with many, many years of work together, but now with this webinar, and to share about the work that you've engaged frameworks and so many of us around the country around reframing family engagement.
Thank you so much, Yoli. I want to start by just thanking Ralph Smith and Yoli and everyone at the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. We have been working together literally almost since NAFSC's birth. And by the way, we were 5 years old 2 days ago. Hard to believe, but we were founded in September 15th of 2014. And the Campaign for Grade Level Reading and NAFSC have been working on so many of the strategic and systemic issues that we are focused on. That includes working with the Council for Chief State School Officers, and now 17 states who are either in the process of or are already launching birth through grade 12 family engagement frameworks that we really expect now to help states be even more strategic about advancing family engagement within their states. And then as it pertains to this work, reframing the conversation around family engagement. The campaign has been really committed to changing the narrative, and we've been committed to reframing the conversation. And so we've come together around this initiative in partnership with the Frameworks Institute and a number of our funders that we'll talk about in a minute to help the general public better understand family, school, and community engagement in a way that we hope will advance policy and ultimately also advance practice. So Yoli, again, thank you so much. This is also our first webinar for the fall. We typically have our webinars the fourth Wednesday of the month, but to make this work for both partners, we're doing it today. With that, let me move into talking a little bit about NAFSC, since we have a number of additional folks on the line who are not NAFSC members. And let me just say, this is the spirit and the beauty of partnership. We have 1,240 registrants, by far the largest I think that either one of our organizations have ever had for a webinar. And I think it speaks to the relevance and the excitement that people have about this work really transforming the way people think about family engagement.
And it speaks to the power of partnerships.
Absolutely. And so we hope you're all going to take this and you're now going to be empowered to be able to better speak about family engagement. That's what this is all about. Let me tell you a little bit about NAFSC. As I mentioned, we were founded in September of 2014. And I want to speak to our vision, which is around a world where family engagement, a couple of keywords, is universally practiced as an essential strategy for improving children's learning and advancing equity. This is about family engagement for all, but this is absolutely about also closing the achievement gap, and we're very committed to that, and providing access and opportunity so all have the opportunity for the children to be able to succeed in school and in life. In addition to being a membership association, and everyone is invited to become a member if you are a practitioner in the work or a parent leader in the work. We also are focused on advancing the systemic issues, really addressing the systemic obstacles that have gotten in the way of this work advancing. And I mentioned the work that Yoli and the campaign and NAFSC are doing around working with states, but this area around reframing the conversation is significant. And you're going to hear from Frameworks and Sean Adamick what the research tells us and how we need to change the way we speak about it in a way that people will better understand it and embrace it. So with that, I'd like to, if we can move it forward, thank you. I'd like to speak to, so once we had the research, we've been working with Frameworks for 3 years at this point. And I wanna also just thank our funding partners who've enabled this to occur, Heising Simons, the Carnegie Corporation of New York, the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, and the Nellie Mae Education Foundation. Had it not been for those 4 organizations, we would not be able to have this webinar today. It's been a huge commitment of time and energy and resources, and we thank them. But once the research was done, we had actually been working together to assemble what we're calling the National Alliance for Family Engagement. research is great, but if there's not an opportunity and you're not thinking strategically about how to advance the research, then we're going to minimize our opportunity for success. And so we assembled, and we're thrilled to have the National Alliance for Family Engagement. You can see there are 20 national organizations who are members. You'll also notice in this slide, it says, join us on the left. This is the steering committee, but all of you, and we are inviting the general public and stakeholders in this work to become part of the National Alliance. And you can go on that website, nationalalliance.nafsky.org, to join, and then we'll give you updates and keep you engaged on the work that's going to be happening over the next couple of years. So with that, Yoli, before we move on to introducing Marissa and Sean, anything else that you want to say?
I think I'll just remind us all that, and I suspect that almost everybody on this call fully embraces the idea that families, parents are so central to the well-being and the success of children. And we've got reams and years of research and evidence, and yet we still see families not being embraced as critical and equal partners in their children's education. And we think it's because we may not be talking about that essential partnership in the way that the public can hear it, that policymakers, and especially people in the education system, that they may not be hearing it in the way that is the most compelling and that will drive our actions and our practices in ways that place families at the center. So I'm really excited to hear from Frameworks and the work that they've done to help us really communicate this work in a way that we see the science and the research, really matching up to the practice.
Excellent, thank you. So with that, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our two presenters today, starting with Sean Adamick, who's the president of Adamick Communications. Sean is a veteran communications professional working exclusively with mission-driven organizations who seek to make a difference in the world. He has had the honor of working with some of the world's leading advocates, including Mothers Against Drunk Driving, the American Red Cross, City Year, the Henry K. Kendall Foundation, Swanee Hunt Alternatives, the Nellie Mae Education Foundation, and now NAFSky, the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, and our partners. Welcome, Sean.
Thanks, Vito.
And then Marissa Gerstein-Pinault is the Senior Associate and Researcher at Frameworks Institute. And Marissa is a researcher and a Senior Associate, bridging the research and research interpretation and applications units. A sociologist by training, she has focused her research on gender and family, medicine, culture, and public policy. Prior to joining Frameworks, she served as a program officer with the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, where she worked with panels of leading experts on a variety of topics. Most recently, she co-edited The Integration of Immigrants into American Society, a comprehensive review of immigrant integration in the United States. Marissa received her BA in sociology from New College of Florida and her MA and PhD in sociology from the University of California, Los Angeles. Marissa, welcome.
Thank you.
And
Thanks, Vito. Thanks, Vito. Okay, so that's all the time we have. Sorry, no, I'm kidding. Thanks, everybody, for your attention. My name is Sean Adamick. As Vito mentioned, I am a practitioner. I'm a professional communicator, a writer, a producer, a storyteller. Ultimately, what I do and what I'm doing in partnership with NAFSky is helping to interpret some really exciting research that you're going to hear about today and integrate it into communication strategies for organizations like yours and advocates like you all. So what you're going to hear today, and I'm going to pass it off to the PhD in the room, to the researcher who actually conducted the research and understands it far better than anyone. What you're going to hear is essentially what Frameworks discovered through this research. And what Frameworks does on this issue and on a lot of issues is map the sort of toxic mindset that can exist on issues. And that means the way the public generally thinks and talks about issues and the extent to which those patterns of thinking are productive or not productive. And by that we mean likely to support the kinds of systemic change that we all seek or not likely to support. And then not just identify what those patterns are, but then figure out ways to navigate around them to help people think and access more productive ways of thinking. So that's what we're doing today. We're going to describe what the research found, and then take your questions and have a discussion about how to integrate it. And hopefully you find some useful tips today, and tips that you can bring home to bring back to your offices and to your colleagues, and start integrating it into the way you talk to your stakeholders. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Marissa, who's going to walk through the research.
Thank you very much, Sean. That was a really great introduction. So I am going to start my slides. Okay, there we go. Okay. So of course, we're all here to talk about how we reframe family, school, and community engagement, although I'm going to focus more on family engagement today. And as Vito mentioned, this is the culmination of a 2-year project. Actually, I think it was about 3 years at this point, figuring out how to better communicate about engagement to the whole field. So advocates, parents, educational practitioners, policymakers, et cetera. A lot of people contributed to this work, and I think have really made it an incredibly robust set of framing recommendations. So to start off with, let's talk about what a frame is. This is a term that I feel like is much more widespread than it used to be, although people often mean different things when they're talking about framing. In our case, when we're talking about framing, we're talking about the sets of choices that people make about how information is presented. So these are what we choose to emphasize in our communications, how we explain things, what we say, and oftentimes what we leave unsaid. And a frame effect occurs when small changes in our presentation can lead to measurable, significant changes in people's response, in their support, and in their thinking. So why is framing so important? This is what we're here for today. I'm going to actually take an example that isn't specifically on engagement, but does have to do with sort of a related issue in terms of children. And this is some work that we did on framing child mental health. And so a group of advocates came to us and said, you know, we want to find a way to talk about child mental health that overcomes some of the barriers, or as Sean talked about, unproductive ways of thinking about child mental health that made it really hard to raise support for effective policies. So, you know, one of the sort of unproductive ways of thinking was that people don't think that children have mental health. Another potentially unproductive people think, and you'll find this to some degree as well when you talk about engagement, is that parents are the only ones who are responsible for children's outcomes. And therefore, if there is a mental health problem, it really is on the parents exclusively. So we decided to test 2 different frames. Actually, there were several others. These are called values. So kind of collective ideas that we share within our society. And I'll talk a little bit more about these when I get to discussing our recommendations for this project. That flag for people why an issue is important. So one of them was this idea of future progress and social prosperity. So a group of respondents got this frame, and essentially what they did is they read a message that said, in order for our country to progress and for all of us to prosper, not just economically, but socially, we need to make sure that we're addressing child mental health. And then another group got a message of vulnerability. So this was essentially, because children are the most vulnerable members of our society, we need to make sure that we're creating policies that address child mental health. And then that black line that you see in the middle is the control group. So those are people who had no message at all, were simply asked after they read a simple message, you know, how important do you think child mental health is, and do you support evidence-based child mental health policy?
Hey, Marissa, I'm terribly sorry to interrupt, but there's an issue with the broadcasting of the slides. Do you mind trying to reshare, like stop sharing and then reshare again? I think something might have frozen.
Okay, let me try.
I'm really sorry, you were in a flow.
These things happen. Okay, let's try this. So how many slides did it actually show?
We just saw the beginning slide.
Okay.
We're seeing it now. It's all fixed.
Okay, great. Okay, so, but you heard me describe this slide. I haven't gotten to the punchline yet, so I won't go through the whole thing again, but essentially we tested these two values, future progress and also vulnerability. And I want to note before I show you the results, which are both compared to the control group. So that black line where people received no message, and then all three groups were asked about how important child mental health was, how much of a priority it is, and about their support for evidence-based policies. And one thing I want to note is that the field was primarily using that value of vulnerability to talk about this. So children are most vulnerable members of our society, and that's why we should care about these policies. And this is the result that we found.
Marissa, sorry, but we're still not seeing the right slide.
Okay.
Yeah, there's an issue with how it's, so when you X out of it there, we see it. It's when you go to presentation mode on Keynote, it's having an issue with translating to Zoom. So you may just need to go one by one on non-presenter mode, but try it one more time.
Or
Okay.
is on the, yeah.
Okay, can you see it?
Yeah.
No, okay. That is very odd. My apologies to everyone. I'm wondering if there's, let me get rid of my presenter notes. I'll have to read those. Okay. Does this work?
No.
No. Okay.
Lisa, do you want to do a share screen and because you have the slides, right?
Marissa, can you send me your deck really quickly?
Yes, it's in the, oh my gosh, okay. Hold on, let me see if I have it. It should be in Dropbox. And I will share it with you right now. Okay. Lisa, did you receive the Dropbox?
I have a draft version.
Okay, hold on 1 second.
Okay. Marissa, can you just try again to share your screen and make sure you're on the right deck?
Okay.
Okay, I've got your slide, I can share it.
You have my slides?
Yeah.
Okay, great. In that case, I will stop sharing.
Everyone see that?
Yay.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry. sorry. Okay, Marissa, try again. It's not working for me. Can you try again?
Yes, I'm trying again right now.
Marissa, just go from here because we could see
That's
the
not the right one, I think.
So Marissa, this, yeah, the problem was going to be the animation. This view is working fine. We can see this fine.
Okay.
The problem is when you go to
Yeah, any
presenter
sort of
mode.
animation. Okay, not a problem. I can talk around it without the animation. Okay, so let me finish up this slide. I'm so sorry to everyone. I've done this before and I'm not sure what's going wrong this time. But so the upshot of all of this is that the field was using this frame of vulnerability. And it was actually doing the opposite of what they were hoping it would do. It wasn't increasing people's support for evidence-based child mental health policies. It was actually depressing their support. And we're speculating based on what we know about how people think about child mental health, that this is because people assume that parents are primarily responsible for their children. And if their children are vulnerable, it's the parents' fault. So why would you support policies when the problem is with parents, it's not with the state or with society? So this is why it's so important not only to think about framing, but also to think to research and do some sort of empirical analysis of the frames that you're recommending before you go out and start using them. So that's what we did in this project. The other reason why framing is so important is that it can really bring together a field around a shared framing strategy in a very productive way. So a lot of times within a particular field, you have a lot of different organizations and advocates creating communications, creating messages that might be sort of interfering with each other. So they have different approaches, they're using different frames, and so members of the public or the people that they're communicating to are hearing a lot of different messages. And this can actually create a lot of confusion, and it also makes it hard for organization to happen. So when you all sort of coalesce around a shared framing strategy, not only does it get rid of that noise, but it also helps everybody work together, which is exactly what we're doing with this project as well. So I think, you know, in general, this entire reframing project has been really well thought out. And I'm really excited to share the results with you because I think it's going to be extremely useful for the field to all get going in the same direction. So what we often find is that when a group comes to us, it's because they have a particular problem in their field. And we call this the you say, they think problem. So experts and advocates are saying things that seem very obvious and reasonable and understandable to them. And then members of the public seem to be hearing something very different. So in the case of family, school and community engagement, I'm afraid, here, let me move this out of the way for you all. Advocates are saying something like, family, school, and school engagement, it should be relational, intentional, goal-oriented, and continue throughout the year. And this is something we heard over and over from experts and advocates in this field. And when you're deeply involved with this field, this all makes perfect sense. But what members of the public hear is something like, well, that's true. Parents should be monitoring what goes on with their child at school by checking their homework and going back to school night. And that's sort of the extent of their understanding of what engagement should look like. So it's much more limited than what experts and advocates are saying. And sort of their assumptions and their experience of what schooling is like makes it difficult for them to really grasp what the experts and advocates are saying. And we argue that that gap is due to culture. So here at Frameworks, we are very interested in the ways that people think on a deep level. And we call the things that these assumptions and experiences that people bring to any topic cultural models. So they guide how we process information. They're the assumptions and the beliefs that we have through years of experience and expectation that help us make meaning out of the world around us. And because they're part of our culture, they're shared across the culture, although they can also be diverse, but known to pretty much everybody living in our society to one degree or another. And also, they are diverse and they're variable in terms of people come to any one topic with a wide variety of understandings. And sometimes these understandings are actually conflicting, but people can kind of jump from one to another as they're talking about and as they're reasoning about a particular topic. So next I'm going to show you a video which I hope works, and Lisa and Sean, please let me know if it's not working, that will show you some of the cultural models around engagement in action. So, I hope this works.
What would you say are some of the most important things like that influence how kids learn?
It depends on the teacher.
The teacher?
Teachers can talk to parents.
Everything, a lot, really depends on what the parents are doing and not doing.
Their parents or other important people in their lives.
Mostly,
oh, sorry.
So we're hearing it, Marissa, not seeing it.
You're hearing it, not seeing it. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's. There we go. Resume share. I'm afraid my screen has been paused.
And now we're seeing the next slide, Marissa.
Okay. I'm afraid I can't, the whole thing has frozen on me, so I can't continue it. Can whoever's in charge of the webinar please take off my slide, take me off share screen? Thank you. Okay. Okay. I'm afraid I'm going to have to skip video in that case. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm very sorry again that this is not working out very well, but I will talk around it. So the cultural models that are particular traps for public thinking are the following. So there, again, as I said, there's a lot of different cultural models that people bring to thinking about engagement, and some are more productive than others. I'm mostly concentrating on the ones that are unproductive here because they're sort of those traps that thinking falls into when you're talking about engagement. So the first is what we call the tangible triad. So there's a strong focus in people's thinking about schooling on interpersonal relationships amongst teachers, parents, and students. So it's hard for members of the public to see engagement as something that's systemic. They think of it as only being between these three individuals. Another problematic assumption is that learning is compartmentalized. So families teach one thing, often sort of morals and manners and how to be responsible. Teachers teach, more academic things. So how could you have, engagement where you're learning the same things across settings when you learn different things in different places? There's a big focus on traditional engagement. So parent-teacher conferences, PTA, looking at your kids' homework are sort of the limits. And of course, all these things are very good, but they don't get you to where you want to get when really talking about effective engagement. Caring, caring, caring. So obviously caring can be an important part of relationships, including relationships and engagement. But it can't be everything, right? So it just sort of, limits people's thinking about how teachers can be trained to engage, how, parents can learn how to have different kinds of expectations of their relationships, that these things can be built into systems as opposed to just a case of, well, that's a caring teacher, and if they're not, you're not going to have engagement, or the same with families. Another difficult trap is the culture of poverty. So this is an assumption that we see across a lot of different topics. It definitely comes up across the field of education, in which people assume that certain, usually highly racialized communities and families just won't engage, they don't value education, or they can't engage. And then community is just out of the picture. People can't really think about how communities are involved with engagement. So let me get into the recommendations. And again, I'm sorry that I can't show video, but I do have a lot of, I think, very good examples of how you would use the recommendations that we make. So the results of our research is what we call a sort of master frame or a meta frame that all of the other individual frames, the values and metaphors that we're going to get to soon, kind of fall under. So if you're going to really frame effectively, you want to think about this higher level and making sure that you're using as many of the frames as possible in interrelated ways to talk about engagement effectively. So this master frame has sort of three important strands. The first is orienting people towards equity, and actually the very first specific recommendations I'm going to talk about are related to equity. The second is explaining context for engagement. As we saw, it's difficult for people to think about how engagement can be systemic and be sort of integrated into the structure of education. And third, to illustrate the transformative power of engagement. Members of the public really don't understand how engagement can change education for the better. So as many examples as you can provide of that, the better, and I'll show you some examples. And if you really want to frame well, you need to do all three of these things. So I'm going to start specifically with discussion of values and examples. And so all the things in this list are different types of frames that any framing strategy can potentially use. And all of these are specific types of frames that worked really well for talking about engagement. So as I said earlier during the slide that wasn't working very well when I was talking about child mental health, values are frames that we use to orient people's attitudes, their behaviors, by answering the "why does this matter" questions. So these are enduring beliefs that are deeply embedded in our culture. They're sort of ideas about who we are and what we value. And you use them usually at the beginning of a message to sort of catch people's attention and get them interested in the topic. So the first value we recommend, and this did very, very well in our testing, is opportunity for all. So opportunity for all sets people up to understand the importance of inclusiveness and to open up the discussions that you want to have about equity. So an example of how you might use opportunity for all is to talk about how we are all committed to everyone having the same opportunities, regardless of the color of their skin, how much money they have, or what language they speak at home. And that's why we need to build these strong connections between all of our families. So that's a way to kind of bring people into that equitable engagement discussion by using this idea of opportunity for everyone. So once you've sort of piqued their interest with that value, you can start talking more specifically about equity, but you need to use very concrete examples and a clear explanation of what equity is to build their understanding of how it works. So this is something that seems sort of obvious, but actually when we were looking at the materials from the field, from organizations, from advocates that work on engagement, the word equity or equitable approach comes up a lot without any definition of what that actually means, or there's a focus on only sort of one part of what equity is without follow through that actually tells people how it works. So I'm going to show you an example. I realize there's a lot of words on here, so I'll summarize of something that, a message that I actually found on an advocacy website that talked a lot about the outcomes of equity without talking too much about how equity would actually work in practice and what it is and what it looks like. So it talks about providing equity-based opportunities, and then sort of lists out a bunch of outcomes that are important. So, parent volunteerism, measures of student literacy and social well-being went up, et cetera, et cetera. But there's no sort of details about how you get to those outcomes. So on the right-hand side, you'll see that I added explanation about what equity is actually addressing. So it addresses the barriers that make it hard for some families to engage in schools, and then gives concrete examples of what those barriers are. So sometimes parents can't leave work, or they don't speak the same language as their teacher. So promoting family and school engagements, it means implementing specific practices, equitable practices like translating materials and holding events at different times that allow all families to be involved. And then I talk about taking this more equitable approach that overcomes obstacles so that all students and all parents can participate and there can be improvement across the board. So it has quite a bit of the same information, but there's just a lot more explanation to help people understand, okay, this is what equity means, this is what equitable practices are, and this is what the equitable outcomes would look like. So this is an example of pairing opportunity for all with equity in something as short as a tweet. So, people often say to us, well, if I'm framing, I have to add all of this extra language. How am I going to do that? But actually, you can just use relatively simple, straightforward terms to get people close to where you're going with something as short as a tweet. So talking about opportunity, saying that something is equitable because it breaks down the barriers that family face so that all children, so coming back to that opportunity for all frame, can succeed and can reach their goals. So just another example of a shorter example of how you can use these frames in a very small amount of communication space. So while we found that the value of opportunity for all works very well across the whole population in our research, we also did some research specifically with education practitioners. So these were teachers and principals mostly in a couple different parts of the country, and found that the additional value of interdependence works very well with teachers in helping them sort of overcome some of the barriers that they have in their thinking about engagement. Primarily the idea that this is sort of one more thing, and how are we really going to do this in practice when some families can't or won't engage with us. And we found that using interdependence actually helped make engagement more important and actually help practitioners think through how communities and families might actually help them better educate children through this sort of interdependent relationship. And actually in the interviews that we did, in the focus groups that we did, we saw practitioners actually do this with their hands when talking about interdependence. And in my line of work, when you see people actually use a gesture along with something that they're talking about, it means it's particularly powerful for them. So an example of this, of using interdependence in a communication would be that in our community, we all rely on one another. So everyone has a stake in the success of the children in our schools, and that's why we all need to work together to ensure children's success. So I'm going to get to our explanatory metaphor, I had a couple videos in here. My apologies that I'm not going to be able to use them, but let me talk about the metaphor a little bit, and then I'll sort of describe the kind of the videos that I was going to show you to give you a sense of how well they work. So just so you know, metaphors are really useful because they help shape people's thinking. They take something that is very familiar to us and they compare it to something that is less familiar and give people a way of understanding and sort of making sense of something that they don't really know all that much about. We're big fans of metaphors here at Frameworks. And we found that one particular metaphor worked incredibly well when talking about family, school, and community engagement. And this was the metaphor of the space launch. So this is, I want to say that space launch and the idea of a group of experts coming together in intentional, long-term, goal-oriented ways to launch an astronaut into space is very much like family, school, and community engagement, when you have, you know, different groups of people, parents, community stakeholders, teachers, principals, who all have their own expertise coming together in these intentional ways to launch student success was incredibly powerful. And actually in the 4 years I've been here, I've never seen the results of a metaphor in our large scale survey that we did with members of the American public. I have never seen one do as well as this one. So it was really impressive and really exciting for us. So here's a bit of a guide to help you think about how you would map space launch from, you know, the idea of launching an astronaut or a rocket into space to engagement. So, you know, when you're planning a launch, it's similar to setting goals at the beginning of the school year. If you talk about mission control and the idea of these experts that have these different types of expertise coming together to plan the launch, that's families, schools, and communities. Obviously, working together in collaboration crosses them both. Planning early, you can use to talk about both early childhood and getting together early in the school year, even before the school year. And then, of course, success can be talked about as mission accomplished or as launching. So these are just some ideas about how you would use that metaphor to talk about engagement. So,
Marissa, actually, I got the PowerPoint presentation working, so we can see if the video might work.
Oh, that would be fantastic. Let's try it out.
All right.
Do you want me to stop sharing?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay.
Okay. And let's see if it works.
When you think about children learning, how does that happen?
Definitely through, I guess, organized schooling, and starts with teachers.
Thinking about schools working together with families, what comes to mind when you think about that?
PTA meetings, teacher conferences, parent-teacher conferences, and stuff like that.
And so thinking about that idea that I read, how should they be working together? What should it look like?
So that just like a rocket launch goes together, you can't have a rocket launch without your scientists and your mathematicians and people driving the rocket and all that stuff. And that's the same thing that goes with the schools and the community. Like, without everybody working together, it's not going to work. And if you have the community and the school and parents all working together, knowing where they're going, then it shouldn't fail.
So as far as schools and families working together, what would you say that looks like?
I mean, there's only so much one can do. I mean, there's so many families that you would have to work with, and that'd be a massive overhaul.
How would you say schools and communities work together?
I don't know how I would like have communities and schools directly interact, but maybe there should be something there. I'm not entirely sure.
So I'm curious what you took away from that.
Boom. That's it. I mean, that's what I've been saying. Everything's connected. We all work together. Everybody wins. As if we all help each other up. We pull each other's bootstraps.
How would you say that affects children's learning?
I would say it'd be a very healthy relationship because, for one, everybody's pooling their resources to fuel our future. Our children are our future. But at the same time, it shows kids that, hey, if we work together, we can get stuff done. We can make this world just a little bit better every day.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts about like what that kind of
On to
engagement?
the next video because I want to make sure we don't miss it. And it's, yeah, thank you.
Wide Family Engagement Center website. We know that Ohio's children succeed when families, schools, and communities work better together. Helping our kids succeed is like working at NASA's mission control. Just like a space launch needs astronauts, scientists, and mathematicians to work together, we need schools, families, and communities to work together to help student learning take off. Everybody has a part to play if we want to have a successful launch. Ohio's families are diverse. We have families with different strengths and challenges from different cultures and histories who speak different languages and who have different abilities. This website is for all of us. We created this website for every child, every family, and every school because everyone deserves an opportunity to benefit from the best resources available. All kids deserve the opportunity to succeed, and that happens when families, schools, and communities work together.
So let me just explain a little bit about those last two videos. So the first one was some on-the-street interviews that we did with just members of the public, people literally passing by who we asked to talk to us, where you saw the before and after. So how people talked about what engagement was in very typical ways beforehand, and then after they heard the metaphor, how they can talk in much more productive ways about what engagement is. They really understand it. Vito, my favorite, is the guy who says, boom, that's exactly what I was, saying before, which was not what he was saying before at all. So that's an exciting moment for us as researchers and framers. And then that second video came from Ohio, from their State Family Engagement Center, who, thank you, Meredith and Barbara, who we're going to hear from later. They pretty much immediately, as soon as our results on our frames, recommended frames came out, went out and used the space launch metaphor and implemented it in a really beautiful way. So, I think that's just exciting to see it in the field already and to see it used so well. It can really be a model for other advocates. So the next set of recommendations I'm going to talk about are the messengers and benefits messages recommendations. So we can switch to the next one. So another thing that we found is when you foreground the benefits to both teachers and to students, it's really effective. And having parents talk about the benefits to them, it's really useful. So I think one of the things that was interesting to me when I was reviewing sort of the organizational advocacy around engagement was that a lot of times it would talk about the benefits to students, which I think understandably bring people in and get them interested in engagement and help them better understand what it does. But they more rarely talk about the benefits to teachers. And what we found was that the benefits to teachers, talking about those, works really, really well in terms of raising people's understanding of what engagement is and their support for effective policies. So if you go to the next slide, I have an example of this type of language. So apologies for some of my underlines being a little bit off. It's the translation to another person's software. So, but just talking about, teachers benefit when families and schools engage because it improves teacher performance. It can lead to better test scores, which can potentially lead to pay increases. Engaged families reinforce the importance of education, which improves students' attitudes and reduces behavioral problems, which makes teachers' jobs easier, increases retention. And these are all things that, again, people in the field know, but isn't always communicated to members of the public. And I think what was very interesting to us is just the amount of positive response people have to talking about teacher benefits. So that's definitely something that we would recommend highlighting in your communications. So next slide. So this is an example of our recommendation that you have parents talk specifically about parent benefits. So one thing that we found was that when you just talk about parent benefits, it doesn't have nearly as big of an impact as it does for teachers and students. But it does work really well when you have parents talking about the benefits to themselves. And apologies for the sirens. I work on a very busy corner of Washington, D.C. So this is an example of I realize this is not the right format for a Facebook post anymore, but the idea of a parent just talking about what the benefits are for them in terms of, you know, they're helping their children succeed, feeling empowered, having conversations at home with their students, and you know, being in touch with other parents, which leads them to community resources. Again, all things that experts in this field know and understand, but people who aren't in this field might not. And having parents themselves advocate for why this is so important, turns out is very powerful. So next slide. So this is what the overall framing strategy is. So I do want to emphasize that because it's a strategy, you don't have to use every single one of these frames every single time, and there might be somewhat different ordering, although we do find that generally when you're using a framing strategy, starting with values, because it cues that why is this so important aspect of the frames is often the best way to do it. But you can use different pieces of these when it's appropriate for your communications. And I also want to emphasize that you should be creative and flexible. If you stay true to the main idea and sort of the core language of a metaphor, or of a value, or of the benefits, or whatever, you know, that's important, but that doesn't mean that you're restricted to the language that we use in our examples. So the great thing about framing is it is very flexible, both in terms of the type of communications that you're making, and in terms of your ability to use different frames with different audiences where it's appropriate. So next slide. So I always like to end with this quote: "A talent for speaking differently rather than arguing well is the chief instrument of cultural change." I did have to speak a little differently today, thanks to my technical difficulties, and thank you all for bearing with me. And I'm excited about the discussion that we're going to have now.
All right, thanks, Marissa, and thanks everybody for your patience. I wanted to, before we open it up, and let me preface that by saying we have a couple of questions already in the Q&A, and I want to invite you all, if you have questions that you'd like Marissa or I or any of the panelists to talk through, please use the Q&A tab. So go down to that taskbar. In fact, you see it on your screen right now at the bottom on your Zoom. It will actually, yeah, on your Zoom, you will see it at the bottom. Just put the cursor over the little window where you're seeing the slide. It will pop up. The same sort of taskbar where you see the chat icon, there's an icon called Q&A. Click on that, put your questions in there, and we will use that list to you know, from which to get questions to answer. So before we do that, I wanted to bring into the conversation a couple of your colleagues, a couple of folks in the field who are in the position to use some of this research for their own purposes and in their own advocacy work. So I want to introduce Oscar Cruz. He is the Executive Director of Families in Schools, as well as Meredith Wellman, who is the project lead at the Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Center, who are the creators of that great video that you just saw, as well as Barbara Boone, who is the director of the family engagement programs at the Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Center. So let me just start off this brief sort of discussion among these colleagues. I know you see Kwesi Rollins up on the screen. Last minute, he was unable to join us, unfortunately, but we're glad to have the folks that we have. Let me just get your reactions. What do you find most useful, most applicable of these findings that Marissa just shared in your own work? Oscar, why don't you start us off?
I'll start. And before I start, just thank you so much to NAFSCI and the campaign for grade level reading. It's amazing the kind of work that this is giving us in terms of the findings. And I really think that we're at a very interesting point in the family engagement field. I really feel like we're in a renaissance. There's been a lot of milestones, and from the new wave of evidence, from research, from dual language, the dual capacity framework. And we're entering this moment where we're now starting to think more collectively about the messaging, right, which is the purpose of this. So I find it very interesting and very relatable to what Families in Schools has been working on. And the things that resonate to me are two things. One, this notion of the technical aspect that it takes to actually do authentic family engagement well, but also at the same time, the equity that has to be grounded within that. And in California, we've seen a significant growth of investment in family engagement under our new local control funding formula. And districts started to do a lot of hiring, parent-centered coordinators, community liaisons, community reps. And one of the things we found interesting was that as they were hiring these individuals, there was a lack of training and professional development on saying, well, what does it look like and how do we do it well? So this notion about there's skills that need to be had, right? That there's actual knowledge and competencies that have to be developed. From the framing, I think reflects really well with what Families in Schools has been doing. So a lot of the work that we've been doing with districts has been professional development on developing similar skills across staff that are leading family engagement, but not forgetting that it's not just about the skills component, but it's also a recognition and a discussion around the equity and the obstacles that families face, having open conversations. So from the immediate reaction that we were looking at this, we really felt that this was raising both at the same time. This notion of the technical component and also equity, which I think is going to help us move away from just random acts of kindness to something that says, this has to be systematic, it has to be across the board, and we cannot ignore equity as a component. So some initial thoughts.
Yeah, Marissa and Sean, we clearly love the work that you did, and it was so thorough, and we're excited to jump right on board, and hence, the video right away. But we really think that this helps us to disrupt a cycle that we have been in so many of our conversations, whether they're with families or they're with school personnel as we're doing professional development, that the idea that families don't care, that certain teachers don't care, that this is just sort of a natural process, there aren't skills involved. And so it doesn't matter sort of how many research articles I quote, how much we really lean in and try to share policies and legislation with folks. We felt like we just continued to circle around similar things, and your explanation of it being culture. And it's not, it's just sort of a way that we think about things that has sort of set. And so it helps us to disrupt that. And we think about in our work that we like to take research and bring it to reality. We want to take the good things that we know and help change people's lives and improve people's lives. And I think you're helping us make that step with this. You're helping us take what we know, the skills, the knowledge we have, this wide sort of collective effort across the country, and to be understood. We want to see people talking about family engagement and valuing it at kitchen tables, in staff rooms, in the coffee shops. We'd love for this just to be sort of change that culture and change the conversation.
I'm interested, so much of what Frameworks does can be counterintuitive, particularly to people who communicate about this stuff, not just family engagement, but the number of issues that Frameworks has done research on. A lot of the findings often can be counterintuitive and have the effect of advocates having a sort of palm to forehead moment, like, uh-oh, that's what we've been saying. We've been swimming in that swamp, for a while. Meredith, I'm wondering, as you engaged with the research, were there any of those moments for you, surprising moments or things that, you wouldn't have expected?
Yeah, I think that this metaphor wasn't something we had really thought to use before. We, I think as Barb mentioned, we've tried a lot of different ways to talk about the importance of family engagement, but I find myself trying new and different ways now and really going back to the frameworks, strategies, the opportunity for all. Anytime I come up against a place where I'm like, oh, I need to message directly to teachers, I find myself, every time I hear versions of this presentation, I screenshot what she has on the screen because they're great, just sort of quick places to start for our messaging. As soon as we really heard the Frameworks research findings at the national conference in Reno this year, we told them that we want to pilot this work. We were about to launch our new website, and so we wanted to embed this message of it's like mission control, there are benefits for teachers and students, the idea of it being important beyond the elementary years, all those things that we try and say over and over again. Clearly, this is a great research-based way to do it. So we're excited to be at the forefront of rolling out this work. And yeah, that it wasn't something that we had thought of before to use that metaphor.
Oscar, as you think about, you could see over, I think 1,200, registrants for this webinar. This is a big field and it's a growing field, and you work with a lot of the voices and faces in this field. What advice would you have for folks who may be in a position to adopt and adapt these findings and put into their own strategies?
When I first saw the metaphor, I really feel that this was needed in the field. This was needed tremendously. I remember an instance when in California, we were advocating for family engagement to be part of a state policy. And I visited an assembly member's office, and we were trying to convey the importance around family engagement. And the assembly member said to me, but Oscar, what can we do? I can't pass a law to tell parents to care for their children. And at that moment, I realized that I was not using the right wording or the right things to help her understand what my messaging was. And that I was really focused more on what speaking to the choir, right? And how do I engage others who are not living family engagement day to day? So I think as we start thinking about how do we use this, I really would advise how do we adapt it to the communities that we're serving and which audiences we want to talk about. For me, I think when I saw this, the first thing that came to mind is this would be a great tool for me to talk to those folks again, decision makers, maybe folks more at the administration, district level, corporate, and other organizations that are not living family engagement on day to day, but I need to find a bridge to communicate to them. So we're still going through that process of making that mapping about where does it not make sense for us to use this metaphor, right? Or the framing or parts of the framing. So I think it takes a little while to kind of make sense and adapt it to each organization's reality.
That makes perfect sense. And Barbara, Meredith, before we open it up to the field, any advice you'd offer your colleagues?
Well, I'll jump in. Oscar's trying to figure it out, and we are too. And just jump in. It's funny. I joke that with folks here at Ohio State that my whole family knows this because I practice it at the dinner table, and we practice it around our staff meetings. Because it's interesting to me. I have often had a hard time telling people outside of work what I do at work. When I'm just hit up in the grocery store on the side of a cross-country meet, someone says, "So what do you do?" And I find I'm stumbling, and I have such a better response now. I feel like I get right there, and they're like, "Of course, that's such important work that you do." So I feel like you've really helped us to you know, be understood, and it's exciting. And we're using it in speaking engagements and websites and in materials that we're printing, and just in so many ways integrating this messaging. We haven't had to change really what we're saying. We're just including these messages so that we are understood and it's more powerful.
That's great. That's great. Okay, let me turn
Sean,
now.
do you mind?
Yes, go ahead,
Sean,
Oscar.
do you mind if I just I had a couple other points I wanted to make sure to convey, because this is so important. I really wanted to convey the notion about the equity that that it is front and center in the framing, and at least for families in schools. And my reaction is, the process of adapting it, we felt that we needed to go deeper in the conversation on how do we tackle about that. So if we stay with the framing around, or the metaphor around mission control and launch, you know, what's the biggest thing the spaceship is trying to fight against is gravity, right? Everybody comes together to try to fight against that gravity that is keeping it the same. We're starting to think too about how do we talk more directly about those forces that we find in our systems that keep status quo. And some of it, we have to talk very directly about systems of oppression, things about inequity, thinking about unconscious bias. And I think that we still can use the metaphor and adapt it at each other, you know, in each of our environments. And lastly, I think it's messaging, right? At the end of the day, what happens on the ground on the day-to-day level has to reflect what the messaging. And I think that's where it's going to be the real success would look like, is if we're talking about equity in the messaging component, it has to be seen very clearly in the day-to-day work. So thank you.
Great points. And there are some questions about equity that I want to get to as well in the Q&A box. And again, if you have a question, please use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom box. We're going to use the last few minutes here, 18 minutes, to get to as many of these as we can, and bring Marissa back in, and Yoli and Vito. And there are some high-level questions here. There are some sort of in the weeds, grassroots questions here. Let's start in the weeds just for a moment. Marissa.
Yes.
You and I have rolled out frameworks research to a number of groups on a number of issues, and there is the very standard, very understandable and justified skepticism about methodology, about, you know, where was this done, what cities was this done in, where, how old is the research? Can you give a sort of, you know, broad summary just to reassure folks about the methodology and really how sound these findings are?
Yeah, so I think, so Vito mentioned at the beginning that I'm a sociologist, and I work with a whole group of social scientists from a wide range of disciplines. And so we use social science methods to create our framing strategies. And these are really, so it takes about 2 years for an entire project. And so we've conducted this research mostly over the past 2.5 years. And we start off with qualitative research, so these in-depth interviews that we actually did with members of the public, educational practitioners, and education policymakers, including state superintendents, to find out how they think about, on a very deep level, what are their assumptions and their expectations about engagement that, you know, could potentially really help conversations about engagement, or more likely and more often are preventing people from understanding engagement the way that advocates want them to understand it. So that was sort of the basis, finding out what are these gaps between expert knowledge and advocate knowledge, and the people they want to communicate to. And then we use that body of research to start creating the framing tools that would address what those gaps are. And so you saw those traps in public thinking. It's also very similar traps with practitioners and also with policymakers that we knew we wanted to address. And then in the second phase of the research, we did a combination of qualitative and quantitative research. So those interviews you saw on the streets, are an important way for us to sort of narrow in on particularly metaphors that we think might be useful. And then we tested the metaphors and all the other frames that you saw against a bunch of other frames that didn't do well in a large scale demographically representative survey of Americans, of around 6,000 Americans. And so all of the ones we recommended were ones that did very well across the board. And one thing that has come up several times and that I think is important to talk about, particularly is that we're talking about equity in this project, is that the metaphors and values and everything else did very well across racial and ethnic groups and across lines of social class. So because of, I don't want to get deep into statistical analysis, but because some of these sample sizes are very small for certain groups, they didn't reach a level of statistical significance, which is sort of, a gold standard for us to say something worked well. But actually, even with those small sample sizes, Opportunity for All and the metaphor did very well across the board and were sometimes statistically significant for respondents of color and for lower income groups. So we feel very confident that these are winning frames that are going to do a lot of the work that you need them to do. And we also did some other additional research after that with members of the public and with practitioners to further test these frames. And as I said, the metaphor in particular just hit it out of the park. And I'm really excited to see how people use it creatively.
Sean, I'd like to just speak to something that Marissa said so that everyone can kind of understand the depth and the intentionality that NAFSC and its partners took in working with frameworks. From conducting research with the general public to practitioners, to policymakers, and to experts in the work. It happened at every level. And then we added, as Marissa said, we added a couple things. We know that primarily because teachers aren't prepared to engage families before the end of the classroom, and many of you have heard me say this, teachers become principals and principals become superintendents, and superintendents become state commissioners, and state commissioners become secretaries of education. And at many levels, they've not truly been prepared to engage families as strategic partners to their child's education. And so we knew that in addition to the typical process that frameworks goes through, we wanted to add a couple of additional tests. So we actually engaged 8 state education commissioners, state chiefs, who participated in 1-hour interviews, for example, so that we could understand, and federal policymakers, so that we could understand not only bottom up, but top down, how is everyone understanding family engagement, so that we can listen to all of this and we can really create and craft a messaging campaign that will resonate not only with the general public, but will resonate with those policymakers that have the greatest influence on advancing policy.
Great. Okay, so I want to get to this equity question. There are a couple of them in here, and I want to try to combine them if I can. There is frequently questions about how universally applicable research like this can be, right? When there are such disparities among the public, particularly in issues related to family engagement, when there are such disparities between school districts. Marissa, can you start the conversation to talk about Oscar, I thought, did a great job starting us off. Can you talk about how this applies to the issue of equity? And there's even a comment in here about the opportunity for all value that, how can you say that? Not all have opportunity, right? Mm-hmm. So speak to that.
So I saw that comment about how can you say, people all have opportunities, and I just want to make sure that understanding what the frame is, which is it's telling people not that everybody has opportunities, but that everyone should have these opportunities. And because, you know, the idea of this being a land of opportunity, this is sort of a deeply ingrained idea in American culture that this is a place where, you know, everybody should have opportunities. Whether or not they do is another question, but it brings people into that discussion of engagement and does really set up the idea of equity, and that when you have an equitable approach, it is offering these opportunities to everyone by overcoming the barriers of language or not having the time to come into school because you're working 3 jobs, et cetera, et cetera. And that then, you know, ends up with equitable outcomes because people have these equitable opportunities. So that's the intention of those frames. And yeah, this is also, I think one of the things about those 2 frames is that it does set up the conversations about, you know, disparities, racial and ethnic inequality, the discussion that of gravity that I absolutely love, Oscar. Thank you for bringing that up. I think we have to integrate that into the recommendations that we're making as ways to talk, to then lead into space launch and talk about systems of oppression and structural inequality. So I think, as I said at the end of my presentation, you know, these frames, you want to stay close to sort of the core of the frames, but they're also there for you to be creative and flexible with.
Yeah, I think that can't be emphasized enough. The importance of this work is not that not that it provides a script for everyone in the field to keep in their pocket and pull out whenever you know, you're talking about engagement, or you know, language that is expected to be cut and pasted into, you know, whatever assets you're creating. It is meant to be adaptable. You all speak to different audiences. You speak in different environments. You speak in through different media. You speak in different contexts. And so even the metaphor, where it can feel like a script, use these words, what's more important is the concept behind it. And, you know, it's funny, I'm looking at the Q&A and I'm seeing some following Oscar's great, you know, direction that Oscar, you went with the metaphor. There are some folks trying it out even more, right? Can you go this direction with the metaphor? Can you go that direction? And the answer is almost universally yes, right? If it feels like you're getting too deep in the weeds of the metaphor, like if it feels like you're stretching it too far, it means it's working, right? And that you're using it in a dynamic way. The other thing I'll say, because and there are questions here about use of the metaphor, is that and audience, right, of this sort of framing. It is less important to worry about whether or not your audience likes the metaphor. In other words, would respond favorably to the use of it or negatively to the use of it. It's less important about that than it is whether your audience understands it, right? Whether it works. Great example is, you know, there's an education metaphor that Framework came up with that to describe the education system as an orchestra. And there was some feedback, right? And, you know, south side of Chicago, you know, some areas that, you know, the advocates from those areas saying, you're not gonna come to my neighborhood and use orchestra, right? These people have never seen an orchestra. Okay, but they know what one is. And that's the point, right?
Sean, let me just add that in LA, when Vito and I were in a focus group type of an environment and we were sharing these early findings, parents there actually liked the metaphor of an orchestra and suggested that, and didn't quite like the metaphor of mission control. So
and this was first generation immigrant parents.
Right. So I think it's what the point here that is so critical is that you've got to bring the right metaphor to the kinds of families and sort of the cultural context in which you are working. And I think many of us pay attention to that. So the recommendation here is that, you know, be flexible, to use the flexibility that the recommendations provide to bring a metaphor that makes sense in the way that mission control makes sense to some and orchestra to others.
And if I may, Sean, I think there was another question on the Q&A forum regarding resources, which I think ties beautifully to the issue of equity, because if we understand that some families have more obstacles in front of them than others, sometimes you need more resources to do the things to give everybody the right opportunity to be able to participate, as simple as translation, right? Many districts are in environments where they don't have enough resources, right? But if we really want to create the right opportunities for everybody to be able to engage and recognize that some families have obstacles that they need to confront, we're going to have to change the way the money is being spent, because we're going to have to go get more money for family engagement. So it's invested into that. So I think it also is a way to allocate additional resources, because it is going to take additional different type of work to reach everybody and give them the right opportunity.
Sean, I think if I may, that this is a perfect segue, knowing we've got 5 minutes before we end here. So what's next? This is the beginning, not the end. And so we're working with the Frameworks Institute and our partners to create a toolkit that you'll hear about over the next 3 months. We are conducting already 5 reframing institutes. They're going to be learning institutes already in 5 states. We've got them already planned for Connecticut and Ohio and Massachusetts and Maryland and Pennsylvania. And we are presenting this also, I think, at the National Center for Family Learning's conference in November. So we are really thinking about how we can engage states and communities and provide them the tools to be able to really take this, because it isn't about just a slogan. It's really about understanding how you communicate, utilizing these tools in a way that helps people to better understand the work. So you're going to be hearing a lot more about this. And I know there's been a link that Lisa's put in the chat box, but maybe Lisa, if we could do it again, so that anyone who wants to join the National Alliance, we invite you to do so, and there you'll receive the tools that you desire to be able to advance this work.
Yes, so nationalalliance.nafsky.org, please go there and keep checking it, right? There are some questions here in the Q&A. How do we roll this out to our people? How do we use this? How do we, introduce these guidelines to our stakeholders and our messengers? The answer is, we have got your back. We are creating resources, literally as we speak. We are creating resources, and they as Vito said, they will be put into a toolkit in a dynamic and navigable way, right? So you can use them, take them, upload them, download them onto your, to share. They'll be shareable, and they will be variable in form, right? They're going to take a number of different forms. So as helpful as we can be to help spread this stuff, we want to be.
So Sean, because I keep seeing this question come up, for everyone who registered, even if they weren't able to come onto the webinar, because we had over 1,000 registers, we will be following up to every single person with a resource document that will include the slides, the links to all the resources, to the videos, the how to get in touch with NAFSCI around the toolkit. So we want to arm people with all of the resources that we've been talking about today.
The last 60 seconds, I want to, Marissa, there are some questions about impact, right? Have there been a breakthrough moment? Have they, how do we know this is working? It's early, right? The quick answer is we don't, but I want to ask you, what are some indicators of success? How should we know it's working?
So, I mean, usually as you said, it's not immediate. And one thing that we found is it often takes many years for a particular framing strategy to really change the way people think and talk about a particular issue. And our early childhood development work is a great example of that, where, now people do understand brain development in early childhood in a very different way, but it's been about 20 years that people have been using those frames. I think the way to make these things work the fastest is to have everybody in the field sharing the same framing strategy and to use it over and over again. Because we know that framing works best in large doses. And so if you remember those arrows that we're all moving together, if everybody is using the same frames and it cuts out that noise and people are seeing the same ways of talking about engagement in place after place after place, that's how you get the biggest bang for your buck, and that's how you move things forward the fastest.
I want to thank our panelists. In the last 30 seconds before you sign off, please use the evaluation that you just saw pop up on your screen. It helps us plan for future events. So please take 30 seconds to do that. I want to thank our panelists, thank our participants, and wish everyone a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Take care.
Just an FYI, we're going to keep broadcasting so people can complete the evaluation. Thank you so much for doing that.